The best of money matters. Wealth Tracker.
Welcome to the Wealth Tracker, where we dive into the uncharted territories of niche investment strategies that promise to redefine wealth. Hello, I'm Hongbin Jeong. Now, Singapore's digital payments landscape is undergoing a rapid transformation, with digital wallets now accounting for 39% of online transaction value and nearly a third of point-of-sale spending, up from just 7% and 1% respectively a decade ago. According to the latest Worldpay Global Payments report, this surge places Singapore at the forefront of payment innovation in the Asia-Pacific region, supported by a tech-savvy population and strong digital infrastructure. As digital wallets continue to gain traction globally, forecasted to reach 65% of all e-commerce spend by 2030, the question arises, is this shift merely a consumer convenience trend or a strategic signal for fintech investors? What's fueling the rise of digital wallets in Singapore, and how are consumer preferences shaping fintech innovation? Well, to find out more, joining me now is Phil Pomford, who is the general manager of global eCom of APAC of Worldpay. Hi, Phil. Welcome to the show.
Ben, how are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. Phil, Singapore's e-commerce market is projected to reach 37.5 billion Sing dollars by 2030. What factors do you think will be most instrumental in driving this growth?
Look, I think firstly, APAC as a region is one of the fastest growing digital economies globally. Huge surging e-commerce, really mobile first consumer behaviors. I think secondly, when you talk about Singapore, and you mentioned it yourself, really digitally savvy, very, very savvy consumers that are driving online growth and creating attractive place for global brands to come into. And I think, the third point really is around the scale and the opportunity from a digital product perspective. You've touched on wallets there, the ease of use of wallets is clearly a big growth factor. You've then got account to account. You think about pay now in Singapore. And then obviously there was the growing trend of buy now, pay later, which is, a digital product which continues to have relevance in the market as well. So I think, as global brands look to Asia and Singapore, it has all of these great ingredients to drive that continued growth.
Singapore is described as a regional leader in digital payments, Phil. So what unique aspects of Singapore's infrastructure or consumer behavior have contributed to this leadership?
Yeah, look, I think there's a number of factors. I think first, if you start from a government perspective, the government has really promoted digitization, digital payments. You only need to look at the Pay Now network that exists. You look at how that is then connected by QR codes across other Southeast Asian markets as a fantastic consumer product and capability. I think also historically, if you look at Singapore, it's always been a real hotbed for fintech. It's been a real welcoming place for startups to create some of these ecosystems, whether the buy now, pay later, as I've mentioned, the ecosystem play like a Grab, marketplaces like Shopee. It's always just been a really attractive place to bring them in. And then, underpinning a lot of that is regulations, right? The government really offers a great regulation framework. It's transparent for all, which makes it a lot, really attractive for companies to come in. We touched a little bit about the consumers. They really are tech savvy in Singapore. I've been a Singapore resident for 20 years. I've seen the growth over that time. The wallet growth is huge, 5 times growth in the last 10 years that we've seen in our report. We talk about the account to account as well. That pay now really has grown, and we expect that in our report to continue to grow, to be a really relevant part. And, all of these products that we've talked about, consumers prefer this frictionless, seamless, safe and efficient payment experience. And, that's what really has led to these payment methods really sort of driving this growth, and Singapore being a real center for that.
Okay, so how do you see Singapore's digital wallet adoption evolving compared to, other leading APAC markets like South Korea, Australia, or even Japan?
Yeah, look, Singapore, without doubt, is leading the way. I mean, when we look at the markets you just mentioned there, so Singapore, you mentioned the 39%. Australia is very, very similar, around 39% as well. South Korea is slightly behind that, 32%, and then Japan a little bit further back. Interestingly, this region, Asia Pacific, is the only global region where digital wallets have really accounted for the majority of point of sale and e-commerce value in 2024. And I think, when you then compare Singapore more broadly, the US and UK, very comparable in terms of digital wallet use. We touched on Australia. Australia has a unique market because of the buy now, pay later scheme there. they were one of the real forefront runners in that particular type of product. So wallets lead the way, buy now, pay later, and cards are sort of second and third. Korea is a really interesting market. It's a unique market in terms of the card landscape there. Cards are still dominant there. There's a heavy domestic card usage. Wallets are second. And then Japan, Japan is one of those interesting markets. Digital wallets still lags credit cards. Japan has been a lot slower in terms of that digital movement. So we are seeing that start to grow, and we expect that to continue to grow for all of the reasons that we've mentioned in Singapore as well.
Very interesting. Well, Phil, how do you compare Singapore's digital wallet ecosystem to, other investor darlings in fintech like Indonesia or India? Is Singapore undervalued or saturated?
No, look, I think Singapore has a significant number for the size of the population, let's just say. I think the other markets that you've mentioned, though, come from a very different background. So Singapore, predominantly a card, was historically a card type market. The other markets you've talked about there, Indonesia, India, etc., very, very much a cash-based economy. So I think digital wallets came in there with a far broader role and responsibility, I would say. And it's similar to what we see in China, right, where China really led the way in terms of wallets. That all-in-one wallet, people called it the super apps in the past. I still think there is ground to grow in Singapore for that. Grab is obviously, has a model that is similar in type to that Chinese ones. Globally, though, what we certainly see is that there's, the wallets are not lacking the same, they lack that depth that you see in China. So I think there's going to be a continued growth in that sort of sector there as people look to sort of embed these more into their lives, which is very, very similar in China. WeChat, Alipay, very much an embedded product in people's life, not just from a payment perspective. And I think Indonesia and India that you mentioned, clearly the wallets are a bit more broad in terms of their capabilities, and they're attracting a much bigger following there.
Digital wallets, they are set to reach 65% of global e-commerce spend by 2030. So, Phil, what innovations or changes do you anticipate in digital wallet offerings that will continue driving this growth?
Yeah, just back to that previous answer, I think there is a big gap in terms of the capabilities and the functionality that people can access. And I think payments is one obviously way of using an app, but or the wallet, there's significantly other ways as well. And China, again, is the place to look to for where wallets really groove in terms of their capabilities away from just being purely a payment. So I think there's a huge opportunity to embed more and more services and products and capabilities. And, Grab is a great example, right, of being able to do significantly more than just use that as a payment wallet. And I think that's where you'll see an opportunity from an investment perspective going forward. That's where you'll see growth. And, very clear from our report that we brought out that, there is a demand for digital wallet, right? So I think from an investment perspective, the demand is there. So we continue to expect to see that expansion.
Zooming into Singapore again here, over the past decade, Singapore's digital wallet usage at POS grew from 1% to 29%. So Phil, what consumer behavior shifts or technological advances have enabled this?
Yeah, look, I think, again, we also had a huge pandemic in the middle of this, right? Which certainly pushed the digital payment piece. COVID obviously accelerated trends that we already saw. The regulation environment that I've mentioned, consumer behavior. All consumers want a safe, frictionless, and fast checkout experience and that capability, and none more so than in Singapore. So I think, where the wallets offer those capabilities, people have been very, very quick to jump on that piece. And I think, the country is very small, obviously, but the government push around digital first has really sort of pushed this forward. So again, we've seen that growth all the way through. We expect that to continue, and no one wants to spend too long in a queue in a supermarket. So the ability to be able to check out so fast with the wallet is something that we will continue to expect to grow.
You mentioned there that you're seeing the past trends continuing here in Singapore. Are there any new payment trends that have emerged?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So I think one thing to point out here is obviously cards are still very, very high demand in Singapore. Cards sit behind a lot of these wallets here. So, what we found over time is in our research is around about 70% of all wallets are actually funded by a card product underneath. So cards are not going away. It's just that the use factor, I would say, from the wallet that the wallets bring. I think then when you start to look at, future tech, what else is coming down the path? Clearly, in our view, cash continues to decline. There's no, that's an obvious thing. There'll always be a place for cash, but cash has declined. The account-to-account technology, so that, pay now, the ability to use a UEN in a store, for example, or if someone comes around to your house to fix something, we're clearly seeing a growth in that space. I think what is also interesting when you look at emerging payment technologies, and it doesn't sound like emerging, but crypto is certainly on the rise. It's the first time that we've had in our 10 years of this report that it actually pops up as a payment method in the global payment report, and Singapore registers that. And so, again, we expect cryptocurrencies to continue to have a relevance and continue to grow as we look out to the next 5 or 6 years.
I mean, definitely. I don't remember the last time I was holding cash in my wallet. So definitely cash is kind of dying out. But are there any new entrants or startups gaining meaningful market share here in Singapore's digital wallet landscape, or are established players dominating?
Look, I think, we've seen many companies, banks, telcos have all tried to start to play in this space to some different levels of success, I would say. So I think, it's a great test bed we've always found Singapore, where you find companies willing to test something new. So whether it's Payla or GrabPay or even ShopeePay, right, from a marketplace perspective, these have all sort of come into the market, and there are benefits for the consumers who use that. So I think, will we see more? I would say absolutely yes, if there is a niche in the market. Obviously, the Apple Pay and Google Pay, continue to be relatively strong, just given the fact that they're embedded so much into the mobile phone. So I think there is space, but I think, there's only 5.5 million of us, or 6 million people. So how far and how many wallets you're willing to use is another big question.
And where do you see room for disruption or differentiation within the existing digital wallet market?
Yeah, look, I think where we see an opportunity, we've touched obviously of the super app, that more and more embedded capabilities. I think there's also another space where you are seeing it with Grab to an extent and others, but it's around that cross-border capability. It's around the ability to, because, obviously very high frequent travelers in Singapore, people go across border, that ability to continue to use a payment method or a wallet that they are familiar with, they feel safe, secure, etc., is something that I think we will see more and more drive for that cross-border capabilities. And, we see that again in the account to account. We've touched on how you can use Pay Now in different countries. UPI in India has proved how you can globally take some of these products. So I think you'll see more and more from an international perspective as we look into the future.
And looking ahead as well, what emerging payment technologies or models do you think will define the next decade?
Yeah, look, I think one of the big ones is definitely going to be the crypto piece that we touched on. That has obviously found a place in the market. I think it will continue as it, finds stability, and, stable coins are obviously sort of, well and truly embedded now. I think as people feel more and more comfortable, crypto will definitely come in. And as I mentioned, it is now showing up on our report, and we're actually expecting that to grow by about 24% over the next 5 to 6 years. So, that's quite a big growth. I think the account-to-account piece, as that continues to develop and become a popular, from a merchant perspective, merchants really enjoy the account-to-account from a speed perspective and from a cost perspective. Consumers are always about ease. And so I think the fact that, Pay Now and its simplicity is something, again, pushed by the government is providing. So I think you'll see those trends continue to push forward over the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Phil, for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Phil Pomford, who is the General Manager of Global eCom of APAC at Worldpay. This has been the Wealth Tracker with me, Hongbin Jeong.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.